So welcome to our fourth annual Effective Practices Conference. We made it here bright and early, so good job us. I'm very proud. My name is Tanya Del Rio. I'm the new-ish Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, where under the leadership of Mayor Martin J. Walsh, who we have here today, thank you. We have a mission of promoting gender equity by empowering women on one hand, but also removing systemic barriers to their advancement on the other hand, and both are really important. We don't, and we really cannot do this on our own. We do this with you, with all of you. 100% Talent Compact signers, you commit to building a world where organizations really harness diversity as an asset. You realize that you cannot design the best products, deliver the best services, or just provide the most value to your customers and your shareholders if you do not have women at the table. That's smart on your part, but it's also the right thing to do. Yeah, and you as Compact signers know that, so thank you. You also know that for talent to flourish in our city, you do not have to ask women to bend themselves into a mold that they just don't fit. You realize that it is organizations that have to adapt to the needs of your employees. And you do that by putting in practice policies that support them and that create environments that welcome them. You as signers understand that, and that is why in Boston, all of you are leaders, and we really thank you for that. We thank you for joining Mayor Walsh in his commitment to gender equity, and we look forward to another year of working together. And this next year is going to be big because it's a year where we report data, and we'll learn whether we've made progress from last year. So we look forward to joining you on that effort. Today we are going to be talking about advancing women to the C-suite and a very important component in closing the wage gap, which is the mission of the Boston Women's Workforce Council. I do have some bad news to share with you today. It turns out that Sally Krawczyk is very ill and she's been in bed ever since yesterday. She really hasn't gotten up, so she's very sorry to send her messages that she cannot be here today. But we still have a very substantive session, and we do have important topics to discuss, and Mayor Walsh is here, so worry not. I am confident that you're going to find the content really interesting, but ideally, you're going to find it very helpful to your organizations. I really want to thank the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston for hosting us today in this great space. I also want to shout out Boston University because without their ongoing partnership, the Boston Women's Workforce Council wouldn't be able to do its job and wouldn't have an office. And we also want to thank McKinsey & Company because they're going to provide support for the event today. So it's now my pleasure to introduce a woman who we are very lucky to work with at the Boston Women's Workforce Council. Kathy Minahan was the first female president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. She also was the dean of the School of Management at Simmons College, and she has received multiple awards for her outstanding career, including New Englander of the Year, the Pinnacle Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, the New England Women's Leadership Award, among, trust me, many others. So today she's very active in profit and not-for-profit boards. She's engaged in organizations that are engaged in major commercial activity in healthcare and education. But to me, really working with co-chairs like Kathy Minahan and her co-chair, Evelyn Murphy, who you'll hear from later, has been a tremendous honor, but really a learning experience. So thank you. Please help me and welcome Kathy Minahan.
Thanks so much. Feels like home. Actually, it's much nicer than when I was here. So we're all benefiting from the progress that's been made since I left. So I also want to repeat all of the thanks that Tanya talked about to the Fed. Ken Montgomery here is the Chief Operating Officer. to McKinsey folks, to everyone that Tanya mentioned. You know, this is a huge effort. Boston has a unique private-public partnership with Mayor Walsh partnering with 250 companies now to make Boston the best place in the United States for working women. So, you know, nobody does, the little group of us don't do this on our own. We don't do this with just our 5 major sponsors. We don't do this individually. We do it collectively. We do it as a community. We do it as a group really focused on what's important. Because as Tanya so well said, it's not a question of whether or not you want to have women in your workforce. They're there. It's not a question of whether you're doing the right thing. It's a question also, are you doing the most business-oriented, business-focused thing by bringing everybody in your workforce, no matter what gender, color, package they might come wrapped in, get 100% of their brain power working for you. And that's what this community is about. That's what this effort is about. And I'm just so pleased to be working with you on it. Now that I've covered most of my slides, let me just go through a couple of things here. First of all, I just wanted to say that we are so lucky to have Mayor Walsh as our partner. The Boston Women's Workforce Council, the effort that you're all involved in, is a public-private partnership. The public side of it is so vital. And his model for advancing women, and he's the one that actually made Tanya's job, and before that, her predecessor's job, executive director for the advancement of women here in Boston. That was a new title, and it's a very effective title. And he's looking at a 3-way kind of effort. 1 is the Boston Women's Workforce Council. 2 focuses on individual women. Evelyn's been very involved with this, as has Tanya, in terms of salary negotiations. How many people have we trained? How many women have we trained? More than 8,000? Yeah, that's amazing. Some of you have probably run into women in your organization who've been trained. Be nice to them. They learned how to negotiate. And finally, we have a pay equity law in Massachusetts, and we all need to pay attention to that. And working in the direction that we're working here in the Boston Women's Workforce Council has got to stand you in good stead for many aspects of that law. Okay, we want to make Boston the best place in the United States for working women. We want to do this by closing the wage gap. As I said, this is a business decision as much as a social decision. All of your companies have signed something called the Boston Compact. You agree to look at data, you agree to make changes, and then you agree to let us collect. This says report. That makes it sound like we actually see your individual data. We don't. We collect aggregate data to show the progress of the community. But more importantly, actually, than any of that, is that this forum and others like it, where the Boston Women's Workforce Council is a convener, really works to spread effective practices. We used to say best practices, but who knows what best practices are? Best practices for your company might not be the best practices for somebody else's company. But if you're getting effective change, if you're moving women along, if you can look at your own data and see that the gender equity is getting better, that's what's an effective practice for you. Again, we've got 240 plus signers, and as Tanya so well said, we'd be lost without the folks at Boston University's Hariri Center for Computing. Talk a little bit about the data. You have in front of you our annual report for 2017. We did actually report data in 2017. We didn't do it in 2018. Our commitment to you is an every other year collection process, so you don't have to worry about it every spring, just every other spring. The data were daunting. We got a highly statistically significant number of employees reflected in our data, 16%. We saw that the women in that sample earned 76 cents on a man's dollar, and it varied a lot by race and with African Americans and Latinas at the low end, unfortunately. We saw that the women in our sample had a shorter length of service and that their cash bonuses, where they got them, were smaller. Now, let me talk a little bit about how this data reflects the overall workforce. We've been very fortunate to work with the Department of Labor, and they have been able to provide data to us using the zip codes that we use for data collection. They've been able to provide data to us about the actual workforce in that, not just the reported workforce. And we have been able to see that the data from our employers really covers a much higher percentage of women than exists percentage-wise in the overall workforce. And we also recognize that the jobs, we use the EEOC job classification scheme to collect data. Those classifications tend to be pretty broad and capture a lot of different markets. So we know we're the first in the nation to collect actual data from actual reporters and get actual wage gaps, but we know our data are somewhat skewed by the number of women, the percentage of women, and where these women are within the various jobs captured by each of the EEOC categories. So we're working on this. We know also intuitively that the only thing that's going to improve the community's standing in terms of a wage gap is to progress women into higher paying jobs. Get them moving up in your organization, getting them into the C-suite. That's what's really going to change the numbers for our community, and that's what we've been trying to focus on. Our next data collection will be in the spring of next year. We've made a lot of progress in 2018. We have some new faces. We're welcoming Tanya here as the executive director for the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, and Shireen Shermack. A lot of you have probably already met Shireen or answered her many emails or phone calls or, but she's our new executive director. We've been recruiting a number of new signers, and we've been focusing very intently on effective practices that we hope will work in your environment, or you can take them and modify them so they work in your environment. We've had 3 quarterly sessions, and I'm going to focus a little bit on that. The first one, engaging male leaders, and there's our primary male leader right there, Mayor Walsh. We have been so fortunate to, as I said before, to be joined by the mayor in this effort. And we've also come to realize that this is not a job that's completely undertaken by the women in an organization. You have got to have male allies. They're so important. And the way you get male allies is to make them visible and highlighted in the organization, encouraging them to take on duties outside the workplace, to bring women on, to work on unconscious bias, and to focus more intently on not repeating the cycle that we see in most businesses, i.e. women come up to a certain level, maybe senior middle management, and never progress beyond that level. Male allies as well as women have to see this as a problem, because it is a problem. It's a problem for all of our organizations because we are not using people well when we don't see any category of person who's well represented in the pipeline and well represented in middle management not make their way up. Women of color. We were so incredibly impressed to have Carol Fulp, Colette, who's here in the audience, Beth Chandler, who's also here, and Betty Francisco join us on a panel, and then take the opportunity to write an op-ed as a result of that panel, focusing on the real issues that exist with women of color. These are the 5 points that they emphasized in their op-ed, but I think what I took away from that is, I think it was Carol Fulp talking about if you come to an organization and you don't feel comfortable with that organization as a woman of color, you really shouldn't. You should just write it off, because your instincts tell you what's going to work and what isn't. And for her, it was the fuzzy pink slippers that she saw people wearing at the first organization that she interviewed with. She said, yeah, if they can tolerate fuzzy pink slippers, they could probably tolerate me. So it worked. And I'm making light of something that is extraordinarily serious, because however bad white women think they have it in terms of glass ceilings, it's nothing compared to the reality for women of color, and we really need to be conscious of that. You know, a lot of this work has been the subject of academic studies for any number of years. So what's the relationship between the academics and the actually getting things done on the ground? And that was the subject of our fourth quarter briefing. Some takeaways, doing a climate survey, rating senior management, making it part of their compensation, how much they move women along within their organizations, and getting companies to look outside and leverage advocate groups like the Boston Women's Workforce Council in creating a changing environment, or in naming a board member, or whatever, searching for a new leader of their organization. So we had a great time with that. So what have we learned this year? We've learned that, surprise, surprise, achieving gender equity is challenging. But when unemployment rates are below 4, it's a business imperative. It's a simple business imperative. We need to advance women into positions of power. We need to focus on the legislation, the mass legislation on equal pay that's being implemented. All of us have got to pay attention to that and look at our HR systems and how we evaluate people and how we progress people, not just, stay within the law, but also to create advancement for people who really deserve it. And we need to look at that culture in the workplace. What is that culture telling us? And how can we change it? How can we make it the norm that the best qualified person, again, no matter what package that person comes wrapped in, gets a look, if not the job, moving forward, the best qualified people. And that takes leadership. It takes leadership from all of you. We're here to help you, but it's you who are really on the front line of making this happen here in Boston. 2019, we're going to continue to advocate. We are going to try and develop a good understanding. In true Boston fashion, we have the Boston Women's Workforce Council, but we probably have at least 8 or 10 other organizations that in one aspect or another overlap with what we're doing. None of them collect data as we do, but they all are looking at women on boards or women in senior management, advancement of women more generally. We want to create some synergy among all those organizations, get them together, get them to focus on how we make real progress. Shireen has a tech background. There are things I don't have a clue about what she's doing with this web community and portal, but we're out there. We tweet, we do Facebook, we do all those things I don't do, but we do. And she's creating an ongoing conversation with new technology that I think is really helpful. What we thought were best practices years ago are probably not best practices anymore. So we truly want to continue this evolution as our conversation continues. So here's all the Twitter stuff you can follow us on. I have no idea what that means, but anyway, yeah. Anyways, I would now like to remind you that any of the comments made from the podium are off the record in terms of attributions, kind of, what do they call that, Charterhouse rules. You can convey the sentiment, but not, who said it. And now I'd like to turn the podium over to Evelyn Murphy, my esteemed co-chair. I'm so lucky to be working with Evelyn, I cannot tell you.
Hard act to follow.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. Good morning. Oh, come on. Good morning. Better. I got to get you cranked up here for the mayor. Look, it's my pleasure, first of all, to thank you for coming today, each and every one of you. It's important. There's nothing that substitutes for having you in the room, listen to Kathy's presentation, the elegance of it, but also to build this community. You have to do it in person. So thank you for coming today. Now, a friend of mine, years ago, I asked him for some advice about introducing people. And he said to me, find 3 illuminating things that you want people to know about this person. Not what they've done, not the resume, not what they've done, but who they are. So here's my version of that advice. I'm going to tell you 3 problems I have with the mayor. Problem number 1. He wants Kathy back up here. Problem number 1 is that the mayor does not take credit for what he's done. He was a legislator. And now remember this, because effective legislators give credit all over the place. And he means it. It's for real. He means it. But here's what I mean. You've heard that no other city in the country has a public-private partnership like ours. That is true. But why? It's because no other mayor in the country has built sufficient trust with employers that employers will actually give access to their most privately held information, wages. Now, building trust doesn't just happen. It accumulates in little interactions day after day, year after year. Mayor Walsh has built that trust. And we on the council guard it ferociously. You'll never read in his resume about building trust. He never takes credit for this. Yet that is exactly how we are here today. Problem number 2. He doesn't have any paid staff that create a glowing image of him. When's the last time you read a puff piece about the mayor? Doesn't happen. He acts. He acts and he lets his actions define him. Problem 3, and my biggest problem with the mayor, is that he is impatient. He walks around town telling people that it is unacceptable in 2018 that we have a gender wage gap, and that the Boston Women's Workforce Council and all of us here are going to eliminate it. And that every other year, he holds us accountable for the progress with data that actually measure this gap. Now, what that means is the following. I wake up every single morning, and this team wakes up every morning, feeling enormous pressure to deliver measurable change. Trust, action, and impatience for fairness. This is our mayor. Please give a warm welcome to our mayor, Marty Walsh.
You're awesome.
Oh, you are.
Thank you, Evelyn. I'm laughing because the other day we had a meeting in the office, and we were talking about where we are and what we're doing, and exactly what you said today was I was criticized for by everyone in the office. You know, you don't talk about enough. You don't do this. You don't do that, and it's my job. You know, it's my job. It's our job. If we do this work to get a pat on the back, then we're not going to do our job. There's too many people over years that have patted themselves on the back about, oh, I hired a woman. There's a woman in my leadership team, or I hired a person of color to work for me, and you know, it's it's beyond the patting on the back and the all that stuff right now, I think. And I appreciate it. I appreciate you saying that. Anyone from the Globe here? We need to get the Globe in this room, so we need to do. Not for the story, but to talk about their leadership too. And this is off the record, by the way, so I can say what I want. Let me. Somebody's texting somebody right now. There'll be another editorial against us. Let me just start with Tanya. Tanya's been in the job for 6 months. Megan Costello was our first person to run actually the Women's Commission, and then Women's Advancement, and then all with Kathy and Evelyn and so many other folks in this room. Thank you. And then when Megan went on to, she's at school now. She's at Harvard. She's getting a Harvard degree. We were looking to who should we put there, and I thought of Tanya, and Megan thought of Tanya, and she did incredible work, and she has passion for this job. We were in a meeting in my office not too long ago talking about some situations in a part of the city where women are involved, and I saw her passion come out that day. Not in the meeting, but after the meeting when she came to me to talk to me about it. So Tanya, I want to thank you for what you do for the city of Boston, and thank you. You're going to take this office and what we're doing to a whole new height. So thank you for that. Tanya's going to bring people together. She's going to help build bridges. She's going to be reaching out to many of you in this room. Some of the folks in this room today, the men leading your organizations might not be here today, but Tanya's going to call. And when she calls, I'm calling. And she's going to be asking for those men leaders to come and be seen. And I appreciate all the folks that are here today. I want to thank the leaders of different companies that are here today as well. But this can't just be, as I look around the room, I see the names, and I'm not going to stop mentioning names. Ken, thank you for hosting us today. Whenever we come, we see Bob Rivers everywhere. He's always here. Every room he's in, he's here. It can't just be Bob and Darren and Ryan and other folks. It needs to be other folks. We need to make sure they come to these meetings. If they're truly committed, if men are truly committed to making a difference, then they need to be in this room at 8:15 in the morning, because they're somewhere else, some other room at 8:15 in the morning. And I want to start right there, and I'm going to end with that as well. I also want to thank Tanya. Last month was a big month for her because she became a United States citizen. So congratulations. So Tanya had a lot of options in her life. She had women's advancement, potentially immigrant advancement, and other things. So thank you for what you did. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank Evelyn for that incredible introduction, and she's amazing, and I want to thank you for that. Kathy, I want to thank you as well for the incredible presentation and the fact that you are not a fan of Twitter and Facebook. I agree with you. I think we should get rid of it. I want to thank you. Don't read Twitter. I'll read some of it. Shereen, thank you for the work that you've done since becoming the executive director since December. Thank you as well. To all the signers of the 100% Talent Compact, I want to thank you for leading by example. It does mean an awful lot. The Boston's Women Workforce Council is a powerhouse. It's an agent of real change in our city. To the women in this room, you're leaders. To the women that have been in this room for the last 4 years, you've been leading for 4 years. To the women that are in this room for the first time today, you're a leader. You might think, well, what do you mean I'm a leader? You're a leader by being here. You're a leader by taking the information that's being given and talked about today and taking it outside of this room and bringing this room out. I talked to, as Evelyn said in the beginning, I was a rep in 1997, and we talked about this before. We talked about doing pay equity legislation. I think I voted on pay equity legislation 10 times as a state representative. I don't know if there's any more legislation that we can pass about pay equity. I mean, we've passed it all. We've done it all. We've talked about it all. And now it's time for us, and it's been happening. It was time for us 3 years ago to go beyond talking about pay equity legislation. It was time for us to take action. And I'm proud to say that action's been taken, not necessarily by me, by the people in this room. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work you've done. In 2014, we had 38 companies committed to the 100% Talent Compact. So we had 38 companies that were willing to give us their data anonymously to talk about what their companies look like, talk about the pay in their companies, and if there's an equity problem or not. And obviously there was in a lot of different companies, but people were willing to step up to the plate. Today, thanks to our newest members, we have over 250 companies along with the compact. That allows us the opportunity to look at the workforce that we have now that we have the information on and the impacts that that can make. And that's something that's really important because data is key. It's not just about conversations and having them, but data is key to be able to back up the information that we want to have. Kathy talked about in her slides. Having that information in front of you is so important. It allows us to take an in-depth look at race and ethnicity gaps as well. It's something that we truly want to continue to move forward. Our unemployment rate in Boston is run to 4%, which is great. Go to Roxbury, it's about 8%, which isn't great. And you start to look at where people are getting paid in the economy. And as mayor, we look at a whole bunch of different things in the city, and I'm always asked about housing and jobs and what's happening. And when you think about the city of Boston, when I think about the city of Boston, I think of 700,000 people that work in the city or live in the city. We have about 800,000 that work in our city, but I'm focused on the 700,000 that live in our city. And they live in our neighborhoods. And some of those folks live in nice buildings in downtown Boston and in Back Bay and Beacon Hill and other places. And some people live in Charlestown and Southie and Roxbury. And some of those folks have lived there for 30 years. And the young people that are their kids are born in those neighborhoods. And I'm watching them being pushed out of the city. Many of them are women. Many of them are people of color. And it's not that they're not working hard. People are working hard. But the issue is they're not making the money they need to be able to afford to stay in the city. Not even buy a home, just live in the city. There are people in this room right now, I'd be willing to bet, that were either born and grew up in Boston or you lived in the city for a little while, but you moved somewhere else because you can't afford to stay in the city of Boston. So the conversations that we're having today are about equity, are about inequality, are about allowing opportunities for people to benefit from the Boston economy and benefit from what's happening in our city. When you think about the work that you're doing, it's in a whole bunch of different areas. 52% of the households led in the city of Boston, 52% are led by women. More than half of the households in our city, their families, their kids, are led by women. 51% of the people who live in our city, 51%, more than half the people who live in our city are people of color that live in the city of Boston today. If we don't continue to make advances in equity and pay equity, somebody someday is going to stand at this podium and talk about how Boston used to be a city where 52% of the households were led by women. They're going to talk about, we used to have a city, majority of people of color living in it. We used to have a city that has 28% of its residents that were born in another country. We used to have a city that 48% of our residents in our city are first generation, like the mayor that used to be here. That's what's at stake here today. And what's at stake in the work that we do. This work is urgent, and we have to continue to move this work. It's really important for us to continue staying on this work every single day. Kathy talked about the salary negotiation workshops where over 8,000 women have been trained to negotiate their salary. We looked at it. UMass did a study showing that 90% of the women who attended those workshops took some sort of immediate action, which actually was able to negotiate higher wages. That works. I've mentioned this story before, being in an elevator, going to an event. Woman on the elevator starts talking to me. She went through the salary negotiating workshop. She thanked me for it. She knew about it, Evelyn. She knew I was part of it. And she said, I fought for higher wages. You know what? I got 15% more than they offered me in the beginning. The workshops work. I actually think there are women that work in the city for me that have used that on me. Yeah, see, I'm like watching this. I'm like, okay, something's going on here, and that's important. But that's important. You know, it is so important. I don't mean to, when I talked earlier about that, kind of brushing aside the equal pay legislation. No, it's important. It is important. There's no question about it. In 2016, the equal pay legislation required more transparency around wages and eliminating bias questions and about salary history. Those pieces of legislation are real important to pass. What I was meaning earlier was that we talk about the legislation. It can't just be legislation. It has to be action. You need the action with the legislation to be able to move forward. And I know that we're going to continue to move forward. We also need to focus on the call attention to harassment that women face in every sector. It's a true cultural shift. As a man, there are experiences that women have that I'll never know firsthand. And as a leader of an organization, it's very complicated sometimes because there's always circumstances around it. And how do you find that balance to be able to, addressing a problem is not the problem. It's how do you handle it when it happens? And how do you move forward in understanding the importance of the different challenges? I've been mayor now for 5 years, and I've had many occasions where we've had situations around pay equity, where we've had situations around harassment, where we'd have situations around cultural problems. And it's not a simple solution, but there are people around me every single day that we work on to actually, how do we deal with and address the issues in front of us? It's not simple. It can't be done overnight. And I say that to you today because if your company is having situations, it can't be resolved overnight, but it's important to acknowledge it and to have the dialogue and not just acknowledge the situation that's in front of you, but how do you put policies and procedures in place that eliminate it in the future? That's something that's really important and something that we have to continue to do. It's my job to listen and understand and lead the city in a direction that empowers women truly to thrive. It's about amplifying women's voices. It's about celebrating the impact women are making in our city. So I guess one of the questions is, how do we take this work to the next level? How do we achieve our ultimate goal of making sure women are truly empowered in our workforce? And that's what you're here and we're here to discuss today. The one thing that we do know that we need to tackle, we need more women at the highest levels of leadership, in boardrooms and in corner offices. And we've talked about that. And we're seeing that. This year, the Commonwealth Institute released a report, the first ever statewide survey on women's leadership development. I thank the council and the many compact signers for contributing to the report. It shows employers need to do more to develop, retain, and advance women in Massachusetts. So it's not just Boston, it's Massachusetts. We can't focus necessarily or worry about what the impact's going to be on the West Coast, the Midwest, the North, the South of the country. But what we can do is we can lay down a foundation where other people will start to pay attention, and they are, to what's happening here, and they will ask us questions. How did you start this? And maybe there's not a mayor that will stand up today and do this. But what you do is you force that person to do it. You force that person by creating an opportunity to come together where that person has no other option than to do something and take action. And that's something that is important. Given the large increases to salaries in the executive level, closing leadership gaps is key to closing pay gaps. We need more women in leadership for another reason as well. The report shows that executive teams that include women are more effective than less diverse teams. So the proof is when you have a more diverse team, it's a better team. That's something that I know to be true. If we're going to understand and meet the needs of an entire city, we need to make sure that half the population isn't left out of the conversation. And we've said that. I just wrote down, we just have a couple things here. In City Hall, much of our important work is led by women. My chief of policy, our chief financial officer, our chief of housing, our transportation department, our recovery services, our racial equity, our arts and culture, our veteran services, our workforce development, to name a few. When you think about the impacts of a city and the leadership of a city, the chief financial officer is probably one of the most important. Because for the last 5 years, we've had a AAA bond rating in the city of Boston. Our pension debt, according to the state, is supposed to be paid off by 2040. We're going to have it paid off by 2025. Our rainy day fund has nearly quadrupled. And you think about the sustainability of a city. When you think about policy in the city, what policy do we tackle? Having somebody lead that understands the importance of what's happening is truly important. Our chief of housing, probably one of the biggest issues that we deal with right now, the biggest issue we deal with are housing, transportation, and education. All three areas are led by women in the city of Boston. When you think about that. So it's important that as you think about a company and structure, having people in key places in that organization is key about moving an organization forward. Not just board members, but actually the infrastructure of your companies, including my company, the company that we run. Right now, our city is growing and thriving. We're doing groundbreaking work in fighting the opioid epidemic, although it's still tough because addiction is horrible. We're working on resolutions on homelessness and chronic homelessness. We're trying to create and working on creating pathways to the middle class. As I mentioned earlier, our workforce development office is going to train. Trent Wynn is the head of that, going to train 20,000 people by the year 2022 for good paying jobs in the city of Boston. All the issues that we have are important. In the areas that we're battling, there's no coincidence that they're being led by women. And that's something that is really important for me. We are successful because we strive every day to draw from 100% of our city's talent pool. The spirit of inclusion also extends into everything we do in the city of Boston. We're developing programs at our community centers to empower girls and promote girls' leadership for our little girls that work in our community centers. We're putting an emphasis on mentoring and partnering with organizations like Big Sister. And I just want to throw a 2-second commercial for Big Sister. They lost a line item in their budget. And they had their event the other day. They're short some money. We need to make sure that organization continues to move forward and be successful. So make sure if you can, would love you to help them. They haven't asked me that. I just know that I got a call the other day and I'm going to try and make up for the shortfall for them. But it's so important that we support that organization. Our We Boston program is lifting women entrepreneurs up. I just opened up in the North End the other day a new store that is products made of honey, toothpaste, and shampoo. It's the first, I can't believe it's this. I think it's the first business of color, Black business in the North End, which led by a woman. That is so important. I can't believe in 2018 I'm saying it's the first Black business in the North End. There must have been one years ago, but not to my knowledge. But we think about that. And we have so many organizations and opportunities for women-owned businesses in our city, small businesses, not big ones. We're also asking you, separate commercial, shop local for a little while during this holiday season. You know, it's too easy for us to be sitting watching something on TV and having the iPad or the iPhone and popping on this and plopping buttons and then Amazon pops to the house the next day. And that's all great to shop. But let's not forget our small businesses, because many of them are led by women, and most of them are led by women and or people of color and immigrants. So we want to be able to get that information out. We're helping women and people of color access capital funds to start their business growth, and something that we're going to continue to do. Thanks to all the compact signers in this room today. I know that culture is spreading and growing in every industry. I see it. I see it in City Hall. I see it with departments. I see it with cabinet when people are hiring people. They're asking the right questions and they're thinking about making sure they bring the right people in. It's not simply the guy who came in and was cool or whatever and said the right thing. I'm seeing it. I see it at the table. I don't really have to say it anymore in some places. I still do in some places. Don't get me wrong. We're not perfect. But there's a lot of places I'm starting to see it happening inside city government. And I'm also seeing the state follow us. I'm watching the state kind of follow along what we're doing here in the city. And I'm seeing businesses, there's leaders in this room that have led the way for a long time. And I want to thank you. And I'm starting to see other companies ask you questions about what are you doing? How are you doing it? So it is important. We're seeing more women in leading Boston in influential institutions like Marianne Harrison at Hancock, which we're excited about. Marisa Kelly at Suffolk University. Congratulations. Andrea Kalin at the New England Conservatory. And that's just naming a couple. But you think about some of the other organizations and institutions that are happening in our city, and that's what we want to continue to move. As I said in the beginning, you're leading the way. In this room, you're leading the way. I want to thank you for what you do. 2019 is an important year for the council. Kathy said it. We're going to be getting information. We're going to see if we made gains. I'm not sure what those numbers are going to be. Maybe they're going to be okay. Maybe they're going to be great. Maybe they're going to be the same. I don't think they'll be worse. Whatever we find out doesn't mean that our work stops. That means that we have to double down. So if we show that we made incredible growth in the last 2 years, than more than any other period in the history of our city, that doesn't mean we can sit back and say our work is done, let's go do something else. That means we have to double down on our efforts. If the report comes back and said it's the same exact as it was 2 years ago, then we have to double down on our efforts, no matter what happens. That's what we have to do. We also have to make sure that, as I said in the beginning, I'm going to end with this, men need to step up. Leaders in this city need to step up. And when I say that, men that are here in leadership, thank you. But other people, there's a lot more other companies that are led by men in the city of Boston. And as I look around, I know the company's probably represented here today, and thank you for that. But you need to be here. We need to be here. I believe that people are going to look back on this time in our life and see it as a turning point. As Evelyn was giving her 3 criticisms or 3 problems with me, I was honestly sitting here thinking, as she was starting to speak, I was thinking about how do we amplify this work? How do we get this work into every single house? Because it's not. Evelyn was right when she talks about, I don't take credit for the work. It's not about taking credit for the work, but how do we get this work that we're doing into every house in the city of Boston? Because it's not there today. There are too many young women and people in the city that don't understand that there's a conversation today at the Fed talking about the advancement of women and actually pay equity and trying to get more people. There's too many people that don't understand this conversation is going on today. So we need to make sure that we bring this conversation out to the neighborhoods. We need to make sure we bring this conversation out to the barrooms, bring this conversation out to the restaurants, bring this conversation out to the corner stores, bring this conversation out to the gyms, bring this conversation out to the schoolyards. We need to bring this conversation wherever we can bring the conversation. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank you I think I spoke way too long, but I want to thank you for the work you do for the city every single day. And I want to give a special thank you to Tanya for hosting you have an incredible audience here. Congratulations.